Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, at the opening of a key meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, President Xi Jinping has said that China has achieved comprehensive control over Hong Kong, turning it from chaos to governance, while condemning what he said was interference in Taiwan. Xi Jinping walked on stage to a thunderous applause from nearly 2,300 delegates who've gathered at Beijing's Great Hall of the People for the once-in-5-year Communist Party Congress that's set to elevate him to an unprecedented third term. By being elected 3 times, and that is what is expected, Xi Jinping appears set to become the most powerful leader in the PRC's history. Will there be enough checks and balances to ensure that there is accountability? Joining us now, Professor Victor Gao, spokesperson of the Chinese Communist Party, Einar Tangen, a China affairs expert and somebody who's a senior fellow at the Taipei Institute. I'm also joined by Xi Jinping, a former secretary at the External Affairs Ministry. Professor Gao, let me come to you first. By the end of this process, President Xi Jinping will likely be elected as party chairperson for an unprecedented third term, thereby overlooking even Mao's two-term as leader. Is this sort of unbridled power dangerous for China and for the world?
First of all, I'm taking your interview in my personal capacity. I'm not the spokesperson for the Communist Party of China. Now, President Xi Jinping is the paramount leader in China. He's very widely popular, and it is generally expected that he will be elected to another term of office. And this is actually very good news for China, because China does need a strong leader dedicated to fight against corruption of all kinds and dedicated to promote China's image at home as well as abroad, and making all the innovative breakthroughs in China's economic development as well as political initiatives. Now, I would say President Xi Jinping is the 5th leader according to the Chinese generations of leaders, and each generation of leader has played a very important role. So it will be a little bit awkward to compare one generation of a leader to another, because the circumstances are very, very different from one generation. The first generation starting with Mao Zedong to the second generation headed by Deng Xiaoping, etc. So I would say at this particular moment, President Xi Jinping is uniquely suited to lead the CPC and China to deal with all the challenges at home as well as abroad.
Okay. Ambassador Xi Jinping, does that answer the query which people, I think, around the world have, that the unbridled power of Xi Jinping going forward? He may be very suited to the post, but the fact that the process of accountability in the Chinese system is quite different from what it is in other systems of governance, is that a concern, or should that be a concern?
Well, the fact the kind of forces they deployed in Beijing to monitor any possible trouble, and 2 banners on a bridge send the whole government into a tizzy, shows you how much insecurity is there in the government. Because what did the banners say? That we don't want lockdowns, which means the COVID policy is not acceptable the way it has been handled as far as the people are concerned. And second was, we want Xi to leave, which means the 2-term principle specified by Deng Xiaoping, that's being now, of course, they changed it in 2018. But I think we're preparing to now see an open-ended presidency. Is it just a 3rd term, or is it an endless term? We don't know. We'll know once we come out of it. But essentially, it's very interesting that the tone that he adopted was not as aggressive as one thought it might be. He talked of choppy waters. He talked of shepherding China through a very difficult period. But a number of issues he never raised, which is the housing debt, low demand in China, dropping exports, and generally a pressure, because only about 7 days earlier, the Americans have put a ban on the export of both equipment as well as software for developing artificial intelligence and chips.
Right.
So you got President Xi Jinping saying that we will win the battle for core technologies.
Right.
So there is a certain concern which is emerging from the thing, which I think it's not a very confident President Xi. He didn't talk of the Ukraine war.
Yep.
He didn't talk of the problem, which is, he did talk of energy and so on and so forth, but not really the core issues affecting the world.
Yeah.
It's a major power. It's a permanent member of the Security Council, and he ducked all that. And so even as far as COVID is concerned, by all accounts, is badly handled. We have a winter coming up. And if essentially what they've done is they're fighting the virus, but they're not allowed herd immunity to develop in China. So if again the virus mutates and you start having breakouts, they'll have to have more lockdowns with impact on their economy, where rest of the world now, more or less, has come to terms with virus.
Sure.
So I think they're in a very difficult position. It's not an easy path ahead.
Okay. Aina Tangen, it's been a couple of difficult years for several countries, not least of all India and Taiwan. There's been a standoff with Taiwan over the last 1 year, a 2-year standoff with India. There's been saber rattling against Japan, even a presence of the Chinese in the Pacific Islands. There's no doubt about China being a global power and one with a global presence. But how does Xi assume that the world is comfortable with that?
Well, I think that he's concerned about China. If you notice, most of his speech was about people-oriented policies, about preparing the Chinese people not only for their current goals, but their centenary goals, especially coming up to 2049. This is a situation where Xi Jinping is speaking to his people. He's not speaking to the world. This is the party of China, the Communist Party of China, not the Communist Party of the world. So it's not surprising that he didn't want to waste a lot of time talking about the headwinds that are being created by foreign powers. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He was very clear about Taiwan, about Hong Kong, about what he believes that China has accomplished over these many years. And you have to remember, our learned colleague from India seems to forget that the Chinese people, last time they checked, was about 90% confidence in their government, which is probably the best of any country of its size in the world. So China is doing things right. There is restiveness over COVID-19, but acting as if this, I don't even know what herd immunity means, because you're just getting more different variants emerging. China has the most successful record during COVID-19, both for its economy and also for protecting its people. The number of people dead, given that it's 2.5 times, 3 times the size of the United States, and they have 6,000 or 7,000 versus over 1 million.
Right.
So I think these kind of unfounded criticisms, they go along with a very, very much Washington narrative, but I don't think they really actually stick.
Respectfully, I'm not sure it's entirely a Washington narrative. I think we've seen a lot of human rights concerns in China over the handling of COVID. But be that as it may, I just wanted to go back to Professor Victor Gao. And let's focus a little bit on Asia. Let's look a little bit at the India equation. There are those who believe that Xi Jinping, to put it bluntly, has contempt for India. He believes that China is the only power in Asia. China is the biggest power, bigger than even America in the long run. Would there ever be a situation going forward, considering the problems we've seen over the last 2 years, where India and China can realistically be truly at peace with one another?
Thank you very much. You are raising a very important question. China's policy in dealing with foreign countries is actually to treat every country, big or small, as an equal. And India is the second largest population in the world, and India and China both have thousands of years of civilizations. Therefore, other things being equal, China looks at India as an equal and want to treat India with full respect. And if circumstances allow us, we want to treat India as brothers and sisters. We do have some territorial disputes, but the disputes were not created by India. It's not created by China. It's the leftover bad legacy by the British Indian government. So I hope China and India will demonstrate enough wisdom to get over with these territorial disputes and figure out a better way to deal with each other as an equal, and nurturing each other, helping each other, and grow with each other, rather than, for example, China and India getting to each other's jugular.
Okay. And one hopes that is the case going forward. Einet Angan, China's economy has been faltering of late. In the quarter ending June 2022 this year, it shrank by 2.6% compared to the previous year. The estimate for this year's GDP is likely only at 4%. That's the slowest in 3 decades. How much of a problem is this for Xi Jinping as he adopts an even bigger role, perhaps, in getting China's economy fixed?
Well, of course, it is an issue, and it's been traced back to demand side. You remember that China has this strategy of what they call dual circulation, which is to have an economy primarily driven by internal demand. And a lot of that was because Xi Jinping and his government foresaw that there was going to be an economic recession, and that depending on the global circumstances was not a wise move. I think they're one of the few countries in the world to actually do that. So I think you should give them some credit along those lines. In terms of how they're going to manage the economy, they have a lot more tools than most countries. They can stimulate demand, create projects very, very quickly, and put them into place. This is not something that you can do in other places. I mean, in India, whether it's Europe or America, South America, private land rights and things like this would delay any kind of potential project for years. They can get it started in months. So the question is, what tools do they have to use in order to get their economy back to a place where they feel comfortable? Remember, you could say it shrank by 2%, but that is not accurate. It is still growing. It is not in negative numbers. It's expected to grow by 4%, which would be a wild success if we were talking about Europe or America. So, you have to keep in mind the size of the Chinese economy, second largest in the world. 4% growth is excellent, all right, but it's not necessarily enough for China. They identified early on that they wanted to be above 5%. And so the question is, how are they going to achieve that? He talked about a very aggressive domestic agenda that is people-centered. It's not about trying to help companies. It's about trying to help people. The market is simply a tool in that end.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to take a look at what exactly has been taking place today in Beijing with Xi Jinping preparing for a third term as president that's likely to be announced at the end of a week-long conclave. Let's take a look at today's big events.
Breaking with tradition, Chinese President Xi prepares for his third term as president, which is expected to be announced at the end of a week-long conclave. In a 2-hour speech made at the Communist Party Congress, which started on Sunday, the biggest response came with the applause from the 2,300 delegates that were present at the conclave when Xi addressed the issue of Taiwan. Xi slammed external interference in Taiwan and in a stern warning said it will not rule out the use of force with Taiwan to bring the self-governing island under its control.
In response to separatist activities aimed at Taiwan independence and gross provocations of external interference in Taiwan affairs, we have resolutely fought against separatism and counter-interference, demonstrating our resolve and ability to safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to oppose Taiwan independence.
Taiwan has responded to those comments by Xi, saying Taiwan will never compromise on values of sovereignty, democracy and freedom. Xi hails Hong Kong's situation from chaos to governance, calling the situation in 2019 turbulent when the city faced massive protests with violent clashes between demonstrators and riot police. But with the national security law in 2020, activists and protesters have been jailed or forced into exile. Xi wants to maintain policies in Hong Kong.
In the face of turbulent developments in Hong Kong, the central government exercises overall jurisdiction over the special administrative, regions as prescribed by China's constitution and basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and ensure that Hong Kong is administered by patriots. Thanks to these moves, orders have been restored in Hong Kong, marking a major turn for the better in the region.
What needed a change was China's zero-COVID policy, something China advocates as small-time pain for long-term gains, was defended by Xi even today, something that's had a huge economical cost. Xi said China puts people first in the pandemic.
In responding to the sudden outbreak of COVID-19, we put the people and their lives above all else and tenaciously pursue a dynamic zero-COVID policy in launching an all-out people's war to stop the spread of the virus.
As Xi highlighted the achievements of the past 5 years, he added what his vision and focus will be for the party to strive to meet its modernization goals to achieve what it calls the rejuvenation of the nation, calling it a Chinese-style modernization, with a pledge to build its economy its biggest challenge. Xi is expected to be named the party's general secretary following the Congress, but he won't be confirmed for a third term as China's president until an annual meeting in March.
Well, joining us now for more on this, Dong Zhui, a CGTN reporter. We're also joined by Andrew KP Leung, an international and independent China strategist. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us. Dong Zhui, let me come to you first. It is, of course, a landmark day for China, with your top decision-making body likely to stamp President Xi as party chairperson for an unprecedented third time, thereby overlooking Chairman Mao's 2-year term, which was the norm, 2 terms. Is that potentially dangerous in terms of Xi having unbridled power?
Well, first, I want to share some of the highlights from the work report being delivered by Xi Jinping this morning, which laid out goals, tasks, and major policies for developing the cause of the party and the country in the next 5 years. Well, in each of the core areas, domestically and internationally, we hear very specific plans, as well as a new term known as Chinese-style modernization, the first time this concept being initiated and brought up by Xi Jinping. Well, according to Xi, this is a socialist modernization under the leadership of the CPC. The report defines a Chinese modernization as modernization in a country with a huge population to pursue, common prosperity for all and modernizing through peaceful development. She also mentioned the 2 long-term goals the CPC will pursue. First, to achieve socialist modernization by 2035, and second, to build China into a great modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, and beautiful from 2035 through the middle of the century. So the next 5 years is the beginning period of the next goal. So we can expect a lot of development for it in the years to come.
But Dong Zhui, if you can just answer my question, an unprecedented 3 terms, is that something the world needs to be worried about? Is this unbridled power dangerous even for China?
Well, first of all, as a reporter, covering the session, I have to say I am just as expected as you are, who will be the future leader of this country. But unfortunately, the result, the election won't be concluded after the closing session of the 20th, National Congress of the Communist Party of China. Then they will be holding the first plenary session of the 20th National Congress.
So it's going to take some time before we know.
Exactly.
Right. Fair enough.
In the coming, the session will last for a week, ending exactly on the October the 20th. So exactly in the coming days, we will gradually get a fuller picture, a clear picture of what's the future leaders will be for this country.
Sure. Andrew Leung, I think it's quite clear across the world that it's just a matter of days before we know or we see Xi Jinping getting elected for a 3rd time, which is a record. From the standoff with Taiwan to, a 2-year standoff with India, saber rattling against Japan, a presence in the Pacific Islands, China clearly has a global presence. Now, how does Xi assume that the world is comfortable with that? And does he really care about what the world has to say or think about him?
Well, I think the presidency stresses the imperative of strategic confidence, first of all, at its model of development. In other words, it's not going to succumb to any kind of pressure to change its own regime or to change its own trajectory, because the trajectory so far has been extremely successful. In fact, a recent Harvard Kennedy School study, which came out, say, 6 months or 9 months ago, confirms that the Chinese Communist Party government is most supported by its people compared with many other Western nations, including the United States, multiple ranks above the United States, in fact, because the livelihood of the entire Chinese people have been miraculously changed under the tutelage of the party. But of course, the territorial integrity has been highlighted, including Taiwan. And of course, President Xi has made it quite plain that, of course, the Taiwan question cannot be left dangling, unresolved indefinitely, even though most of the Taiwanese people do not really want immediate unification. But on the other hand, the dynamics are set in motion, because Taiwan, after all, is just an island, and over 1 million Taiwanese, together with members of the family, have been already working with the family members living there on their business on the mainland. And of course, the Taiwanese economy depends on China. So the dice is loaded, as it were, to accelerate the process of negotiation for peaceful.
Well, one would only hope that there's no war across the Taiwan Strait. As we almost went to war, we saw a war-like situation emerge following Nancy Pelosi's visit over there, with the Taiwanese absolutely clear that they want nothing to do with a unified China, quite in the manner in which Xi Jinping does. But be that as it may, Dong Xue, China's economy, and this of course is the other huge global concern. Now, China's economy, which has been incredible in the last several years, has been gradually but consistently faltering. In the quarter ending June 2022, it shrank by about 2.6% compared to the previous year. Now, the estimate for this year is likely to see the GDP grow at only 4%, which is the slowest in 3 decades. So, will this also be a key factor for Xi Jinping, assuming he does come back for a 3rd term, getting the Chinese economy back to what it was?
Yes, of course. I think to any countries, the economic slowdown is the top concerns for any countries due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has slowed down the global chain and global connectivity. But talking about this, many might suspect that China's economic slowdown are mainly contributed because of the dynamic zero COVID policy. However, this morning during the open session, she said that China will continue to protect its people's lives and health from COVID, because he said that since the people are the country, I quote, that's what he said, and the party has always been putting people's well-being in a paramount position throughout its history. So China has implemented this very strict dynamic COVID zero policy, an approach that has been drawn both support as well as criticism. I'm not sure you've watched the video that the head of the China's COVID response, Liang Wannian, a couple of days ago, he has explained, and obviously he has explained a couple of times before, that China is still facing, mounting pressures from imported cases and should stick to the general principle of fighting the pandemic. One factor is if we left it uncontrolled, there will be massive infections and deaths, resulting in a squeeze on the healthcare system, and of course will causing more problems on the economic front.
Right. Well, there have been concerns about whether human rights have been violated in the process of China trying to control COVID. But of course, the battle against COVID clearly continues. I'd like to thank you both very much for joining us. These are very important days in China, and what actually takes place is going to affect not just China, but nations around the world. Thank you both very much for being with us.